All right, it's May the 8th, and we're going to continue to work our way through this 41-page appeal document where Schaeffer Cox has spent hours and hours and hours fighting for his freedom to be reunited with his children. And so the government spent millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to entrap, persecute, set up, run him through a false kangaroo trial, and now they're imprisoning him. And now they're letting leeches in society like Yvonne Lamoureux make her living and make a career out of putting an innocent man in prison. And that's her right there. She's driving the appeal efforts for Schaeffer Cox. And then you have the address if you want to write Schaeffer Cox a letter. They've got him in a secret CMU prison, so he may not be able to write you back, but I'm pretty certain he can at least receive the letter. All right. This document that I'm going to be reading from today is on this Dropbox location. I'll put the link in the information bar and also the comments. All right. This is the way Schaeffer Cox wanted it presented. If you guys read at the top here, it says, these circles are all BS alerts. These circles are BS alerts. Look up her chapter and verse, and you'll see the lies. Smiley face, Schaeffer Cox. Now, it says page 3 down here, but that's not the page number we're going to pay attention to. If you guys see this right here, it says page 13. Okay? So what I'm thinking about doing is I'm going to read page 13, and then I'm going to read Schaeffer's rebuttal to what Yvonne Lamoureux, the Jezebel from Satan himself, has said about Schaeffer. And I should also probably go... This is the appeal document. These are the appeal records. He said this one is 1,627 pages. That's Yvonne Lamoureux, and Karen Loeffler's out of the picture now, but she'll be held accountable on judgment. God Almighty will hold her accountable. Statement of issues presented. Whether the trial court committed plain error in instructing the jury on the conspiracy to murder federal officials, whether the court should decline to consider Cox's ineffective assistance of counsel claim on direct appeal when there is no evidence that Cox was denied effective assistance of counsel. 3. Whether viewing the evidence in light of the most favorable to the United States, any rational juror could have found Cox guilty of conspiring to murder federal officials and soliciting others to murder a federal official. Whether the trial court properly admitted evidence of Cox's statements and information about groups with which he was involved. All right, let's go to page 13. The reason this page 13 is important, right at the top here, you guys see that? It says page 13 is because it's matching up with that, page 13 over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to read what Yvonne has to say on page 13, and then I'm going to come over here and read what Schaeffer has to say. Introduction. Cox was indicted with 2 co-defendants, Coleman Barney and Lonnie Vernon, in a 16-count indictment charging a conspiracy to murder federal officers and employees, solicitation to murder a federal official, conspiracy to possess unregistered silencers and destructive devices, and other weapons violations. ER 9-32. After a lengthy jury trial, Cox was convicted of all counts except those charging Cox with carrying a firearm during a crime of violence. SER 1-4. The case was presided over by Senior United States District Judge Robert J. Bryan, W.D. Washington. Boo. They brought him out of retirement because he wouldn't have to worry about being impeached. Cox was the commander and leader of the Alaska Peacemakers Militia, a sovereign citizen group based in Fairbanks, Alaska. Co-defendant Barney had the rank of major in Cox's militia, and co-defendant Vernon was a sergeant. Between 2009 and 2011, when they were arrested, Cox and the others conspired and planned to murder federal officials including federal law enforcement officers, U.S. Marshals, Transportation and Security Administration employees, and a Department of Homeland Security employee. Okay, that's the lies from the forked tongue of Yvonne Lamoureux, who is selling out her soul in order to make a successful career as a United States attorney. She doesn't mind putting innocent men in prison to further and advance her own career. Schaeffer Cox has to say, Cox's defense sentencing memorandum proves he did not plot to murder or harm anyone. Okay, that's what Schaeffer had to say about page 13. Now we're going to move over here to page 14, where you can see the BS meter from Yvonne has got a little bit more active. Whoops. And at the top here, you'll see page 14, and that lines up with this 14, that 14, and there's more 14s at the bottom. As well as state officials, including Alaska State Troopers, state court judges, and State of Alaska Office of Children's Services employee. During the conspiracies and until they were arrested, Cox, Barney, and Vernon possessed a number of illegal and unregistered firearms and destructive devices that were trying to get more. Cox and Barney had a trailer that contained a fully automatic machine gun, a silencer attached to a .22 pistol, numerous semi-automatic assault rifles, thousands of rounds of ammunition, tannerite, 17 grenade bodies, grenade fuses, 28 OC gas canisters, CS gas canisters, 7mm launchers, and hornet's nest, anti-personnel rounds. In addition, the defendants had weapons, legal and illegal, in their homes and vehicles. Cox repeatedly threatened federal and state officials during the conspiracies and took steps to act upon those threats. For instance, Cox gathered information about federal and state employees that he wanted killed in the event he was arrested in case of a government collapse. The defendants shared beliefs that the current government was no longer operating under the rule of law, but under a rule of force. They considered themselves sovereign citizens. Cox and others developed okay, that's page 14. Right there, page 14. So that's Yvonne Lamoureux's spew of lies. We're going to come over here and read Schaeffer Cox's response to page 14. And for some reason it got too big. Okay, here we go. Page 14. Cox did not have illegal weapons. He had an inoperable movie prop Sten submachine gun. The government showed this to the jury, then showed a video of a different Sten, a real one, firing fully automatic in slow motion. The jury was led to believe that they were the same gun. 14, the second 14. Cox did have a homemade silencer on a .22 caliber pistol. This he does not deny, but he went to the ATF office in 2009 to pay the $200 tax stamp on it and was told that the tax was only paid when or if it was transferred. So Cox did not pay the tax or fill out the paperwork that day. This was brought up in pretrial motions. The judge said it was an entrapment by estoppel issue for the jury. But when defense attorneys tried to present the estoppel question to the jury, the government objected and the judge sustained their objection, contradicting his earlier deferral. Another 14. All the grenade bodies, fuses, OC and CS canisters, hornet's nest, and launchers were either gifts from Aaron Bennett or planted at Cox's home by Bennett after a UAF gun show without Cox's knowledge. Cox lived right next to UAF's campus and had a big garage with lots of storage. Bennett lived in the next town over. It was not uncommon for Bennett or others to share containers of gun show sale items in Cox's garage. Between the frequent gun shows sponsored by the UAF rifle teams, the items referred to here were put in green steel drums in Cox's garage by Bennett when he dropped off some tents Cox had bought from him. This is more materiality for Bennett-Brady violations. Cox has always held that Aaron Bennett is an informant by the government, and the fact the government never divulged Bennett as an informant is a Brady violation, and Cox's appeal should be granted, and he should be let out of prison for that reason alone. Another page 14. If Cox really repeatedly threatened federal officials, then he would have been arrested for it when he made the threats. The truth is, he didn't make threats. Another 14. Defense sentencing memorandum proves government's claim that Cox would harm people if he was arrested. The truth is that confidential informant Fulton threatened to murder Cox precisely because Cox refused to agree to plot violence. I don't recall any testimony that support the claim that Cox would hurt people if arrested. Number 14 again. Cox does not understand what this sovereign citizen stuff is. He supports the Constitution, but what's wrong with that? 14 again. Developed a plan, i.e. talked about it but then rejected it. This is different than agreed to a plan. The agreed plan was to leave. Okay, that's all of what Cox had to say about page 14. We're going to go over to page 15 now. Oh, you know what? Whoops. There's 14. Okay, here we go. Page 15. Okay. Here's Yvonne Lamoureux's lies on page 15. Plan they called 241. That's a BS indicator. Which entailed, in the event that Cox or any militia members were killed, Cox and others killing 2 other people, such as federal law enforcement officers and judges in return. Cox also believed that there was a federal plot to kill him and his family, and that the federal government was behind OCS's efforts to take his son away from him. Another BS. Because Cox challenges the sufficiency of the evidence, the details of the conspiracy need to be laid out in some detail, as will be seen below. Cox began with rhetoric and angry encounters with federal and state personnel, but by the time his arrest, he had developed a plan for the imminent murder of federal officials, stockpiled his arsenal of weapons, and enlisted others to join him. 2 facts of the case. A. Fall of 2009 through March of 2011. In the fall of 2009, Cox traveled outside Alaska and made a number of speeches related to the right to bear arms at meetings and... Okay, that's page 15 up here, and that matches with this 15 here. Cox says defense sentencing memorandum shows that 241 plan was the government's idea and soundly rejected by the defendants. Another 15. Military police testified that U.S. Marshals had bragged of their plan to try to take Schaeffer Cox's baby son and shoot Schaeffer Cox in the process, and that this was how they would fix the Schaeffer Cox problem. It's on the record and in the defense sentencing memorandum. Another 15. The feds were behind the effort to take Cox's son. It was an attempt to agitate Cox prior to the Bill Fulton knife to the throat incident at Blondie's, where Fulton tried and failed to get Cox to plot an attack to save his kid. See defense sentencing memorandum. Another 15. The only thing that was imminent at the time of Cox's arrest was his departure from the country, expressly to avoid Fulton and his death. Threat ultimatums. Cox testified to this, and I don't believe it was contradicted. Barney, Olson, Sutherland may also have testified that Cox was fleeing the country. I don't recall any testimony of imminent murder. Another 15. I don't believe there was any testimony offered to support the notion that Cox enlisted others to join him in a murder. Attorney Lamoureux is saying this, but I don't think witnesses said it. Okay, that's the end of 15. Let's go over to 16. Okay, as you can see here, this is page 16, and that matches up with that 16. Conventions. See exhibits, blah, blah, blah. Cox spoke about his previous interactions with law enforcement, including the TSA, AER 1613-20. He also described his development of the Liberty Bell Network, a functioning common law court, and a militia ID. He discussed the command structure of his militia and claimed that he had a 3,500-man force that was equipped with GPS jammers, cell phones, jammers, bombs, rocket launchers, grenade launchers, claymore machine guns, and other items. BS alert. Cox tasked others to compile information on federal and state officers and employees to kill. Back in Alaska, Cox and Michael Anderson met in Fairbanks and plotted their strategy if the government declared martial law. AER 266-67, Cox and Anderson agreed government leaders would have to be killed. BS alert. AER 268-69, Anderson testified it was just generally if it... Okay, this is page 16. We're going to jump out over to Schaeffer Cox's rebuttal. Okay, it's not in the record, but from discovery we can prove that these bragging statements about cell phone jammers, rocket launchers, grenade launchers, claymore machine guns, and other items was a verbal retweet of Bennett's claim to have those things. See FBI report attached to okay, this is another 16 attached to Cox's Bennett-Brady affidavit. Cox and Anderson never agreed to kill anyone. Anderson never testified about an actual agreement in real life, only hypothetical what-ifs in a dystopian future that will probably never happen. Read it. Okay, now we're going to go over to page 17. Okay, as you can see right here, it says page 17. So we're going to read Yvonne Lamoureux's lies. Comes to that, you know, we have to identify who was doing it and take them out before they could come for us. And I mean kill them before they come for us. AER 268. Cox and Anderson decided somebody just texted me. I want to read this to you guys. It's amazing it came in just now. Hi, today Schaeffer Cox has been working on his appeal. Please pray for him. His heart was heavy. So somebody received a phone call from Schaeffer Cox from prison, and they're asking for prayer, and I'm in turn asking you guys for prayer. We'd have to identify who was doing it and take them out before they could come for us, and I mean kill them before they could come for us. AER 268. Cox and Anderson decided to create a list or database that would contain the names of government officials. Together with their home address information, they would kill when martial law took effect. AER 268, 271 through 75. In spring of 2010, Cox asked Anderson about the progress of the database and told Anderson that he thought there was a federal hit team after Cox, and Cox wanted to know who they might be and where they might be. AER 315 through 16. Anderson and Cox discussed how to gather information about federal officials. AER 317, 18, 21, 22. During that conversation, Anderson sketched the federal building in Fairbanks, and the men discussed conducting surveillance. AER 321, 22, AER 1571. Also at the meeting, Cox provided Anderson with the name of Alaska State Troopers GT, BB, and RW. RW is Ron Wall. To include in the database. AER 317 through 20, 1571. Cox also provided Anderson with the names of 3 federal officials, NC with DHS Border Control, TS with DHS, that's, and TB is Trina Bootcamp with TSA. AER 323, 25, 1571. Anderson wrote down this information from Cox. AER 323 regarding TSA employee. Whoops. Okay, that's page 17 right there, page 17. Now we're going to jump over to page 17 here. Page 17. Anderson said Cox did not instruct him to create a list, but that he did it on his own, then changed his mind. Also saying, when the government collapses, I'm going to fight anyone who tries to kill me, is not a conspiracy to murder. Even if Cox and Anderson did agree to such a thing, but they didn't even do that, Cox asked Anderson to try to find out who might be out to kill Cox. who might be on this rumored federal hit list made by the rumored federal hit team who was going to murder me to fix the Schaeffer Cox problem. I don't believe Cox's testimony was contradicted on this. Okay, that's what Cox has to say about page 17. Let's go over to page 18. Okay, this is page 18 of more of Yvonne Lamoureux's lies. Trina Bootcamp, Cox told Anderson, she's someone I know who goes to my church, a nice lady, but you know one day she might just follow orders and she may have to go. AER 325. Anderson's notebooks reflecting some of the information for the database were admitted at trial. AER 1570 through 72, ER 620. On the same page of Anderson's notepad were the names of federal employees NC, TS, and TB appear. There was also a notation at the top of the page with phone numbers and the name Vernon's, with 2 lines indicating I need names of federal marshals, and paperwork from Vernon's. AER 1571. After that meeting with Cox, Anderson looked on the internet for federal marshal something or other. AER 328 through 31. On a page in his notebook, Anderson wrote federal hit list at the top, then wrote JJ Federal Marshal ANC, ER 620. Anderson testified that for the database he collected home addresses, standard addresses, street addresses, plot numbers of the State of Alaska Department of Natural Resources, and public information using Google website searches. AER 271, 72, and 312. Okay, I want to remind you guys this is page 18. Now we're going to jump over here to what Schaeffer Cox has to say about page 18. Federal hit list on Anderson's notebook meant a list of people the feds were out to kill. I think Anderson said so. And this would be corroborated by Cox, Gibson, Barney, and Clark. I don't recall any testimony that the words federal hit list or Anderson's paper referred to a list of feds to be killed. But that's what Lamoureux is improperly implying. Okay, let's go to page 19. Yeah, here we go. Page 19. Right there, page 19. Cox also directed Anderson to compile information about several Alaska State Troopers. AER, you see the numbers. For example, Cox called Anderson and gave him the names of Ron Wall and LP. AER 1572. Also in the fall of 2010, Cox called Anderson and asked him to find out where Alaska State Trooper MJ was based. Anderson told Cox that MJ worked in Fairbanks. Later in February 2011, Cox provided Trooper MJ's information to one of the government cooperating witnesses, Gerald J.R. Olson, on a post-it note. Cox described Trooper MJ as the guy we've been having problems with. AER 1288 through 89. The post-it note showed Trooper MJ's name with property lot and block number information. In addition, the post-it note included personal information about Trooper MJ that he was former Army. Cox provided Olson with Alaska State Troopers' personal address to add them to the list and to have them available for them if Cox initiated 241 AER 729. And then he draws a little circle, which is BS. Okay, remember, this is page 19. Now we're going to come over here and read page 19. I don't think that the claim that Trooper MJ was put on some sort of 241 list by Olson after Cox told him to is supported by anything that but Olson's perjury. And besides, MJ is not a federal official, so it should be stricken as evidence for a federal crime. Okay, let's go over to page 20. This is page 20 right here. Cox instigates confrontations with his targets. Cox instigated confrontations with federal officials, including TSA employees, TB, DB, JH, and DHS employees, NC, and with state officials, including Alaska State Trooper Ron Wall. TSA employee TB had hosted lunches at her house, that's Trina Bootcamp, for college students from her church, which Cox attended, including wearing body armor once. At one point, Cox called TB and asked whether he was on the no-fly list. TB refused to provide Cox with that information and told TS, the federal security director at the airport in Fairbanks, that Cox attempted to obtain that information from her. TB was added to Cox's hit list. Cox approached DHS employee NC when she was off duty but in uniform at Walmart with her daughter. NC described Okay, this is page 20. Now we're going to come over here. And Cox says, take a look at AER 1571. It's not acceptable to call this a hit list. We need to object. Okay, and now he's going to go to page 22. Okay, that's 21. Okay, that's page 22 right there. Okay, this is probably the last page I'll do for this video, and we'll pick up later and finish the rest. Let's read what 21 said at the bottom. I need to know who the Nazis are. Shortly after that encounter, DB saw the TSA Federal Security Director TS speaking with Cox, and by their body language it looked a little confrontational. TSA employee TS was added to Cox's hit list. BS. Cox's mother-in-law described statements about TSA agents Cox made during Thanksgiving 2010. Remember, Cox doesn't get along with his mother-in-law all that well. The mother-in-law is the one who called the cops when there was no incident at all with his wife Marty. The most specific remark that I heard him say was when they were talking in reference to two TSA agents, and the conversation was talking about what they would like to do if the federal government, and talking specifically about TSA agents, did something to his family, and that they would go in and burn the homes of those agents, and if the families were there and were running out during the fire, they would shoot them down. Okay, Cox's mother-in-law further testified that she knew that Cox had a hit list of things, that if the government crossed the line pertaining to those certain things, they were prepared to act. Her testimony was also highlighted in an important shift in the threats Cox was making. No longer was his planning solely for a hypothetical declaration of martial law. Cox had begun to assert that he would trigger his plans to kill federal agents if they did something to his family, and later if Cox were killed. BS. Finally, he issued instructions. Okay, this is the top of page 22. We're going to come over to 22 right here. Janice Stewart's testimony about Cox saying he had set homes on fire and shoot people who ran out is a lie. And there are half a dozen people who could attest that Cox never said such a thing during Thanksgiving or ever. They are Bill Rensel, Maria Rensel, Dave Roner, David Bartell, Marty Cox, Schaeffer Cox, and a guy named Cody, whose last name I can't remember. He came with Roner and Ken Thessing. Schaeffer also has to say, the characterization of Janet Stewart's testimony by Lamoureux is not true to what Janice actually said. Also, what Janice said about Cox told her is demonstrably false, because Cox and Janice had not been on speaking terms for many years. They only saw each other a couple of times a year ever, and literally not one single word had been spoken between them since she had called the cops on Cox in February of 2010. Not even hello. Just total silence to her and around her. Read docket 635, page 84 of 262. She says, honestly, I don't remember any specific if that would trigger anything. Page 90, she says to Traverso's question, so you didn't feel that he was going to tomorrow, to next day, gather up some men and go shoot TSA employees? Her answer, no, page 91. Janice says, I never felt it was something they were going to go out and do immediately. All right, the next one is page 23, but I'm going to pause here, and we'll pick up and finish this thing as I get time. We still got a long way to go. All right, take care. God bless.